And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents. This is Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and we are coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, where we are nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau in the midst of harvest. We're actually going to process grapes tomorrow. They're picking them tonight.
Yep.
But we're still podcasting. And we have actually I've been talking, we've been working on this for a while. So we have Peter joining us from across the pond over in UK.
Oh, yes. Howdy.
How you going, Peter?
Yeah, good.
Welcome.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I wish I was from the Lone Star State, but I'm from jolly old England. You know, we can't all be that cool, can we, really?
So Peter is in the Discord, and if you guys remember, we had Trevor on, who wrote the book God's Eye View, and Trevor and Peter have been talking. They've been working together on some stuff, and I've had a bunch of people in the Discord telling me for a while, including Martin was also like, you got to get this guy on, and I'm like, okay, because if we're gonna talk Arthur, they were like, this is the guy we got to talk to, and I'm like, I'm all about the Arthurian legends, you know that. So
well,
welcome,
I don't think
buddy.
How anyone interested in the things that we're all interested in can't be not interested.
Right.
In, you know,
you should be.
Yeah, should be interested in.
Yeah.
That.
If you aren't, hopefully this episode will change that.
Yeah. So
how did you give people a brief explanation? Like, how did you get into this? You know, what sparked your interest?
So
and where are we going?
I mean, in terms of how I think about things, all my further education was in cinema, and film. When it comes to film theory, film criticism, stuff like that, there weren't people studying film 30, 40 years ago, but they studied English, and they did it with a emphasis in film. So all of my lecturers were basically English doctors. And what you do in literature is study texts. And that's basically how we worked with film, is you treat it like a text. You know, what is it trying to say? How is it doing it? What's the style? What's the author's intention? What's the author's context? What other influences, like, for instance, the money, the economics, they drive how the film looks, what the film says. So when it came to history, looking at text was just already something that my brain did, and I don't think I fell into certain traps that other people might do. It used to really wind me up sometimes, where you'd be looking at a medieval text that says something about Arthur, and someone will say, well, be careful of the propaganda. There's propaganda in that. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's a text. All texts are imbued with the ideology of the author. I mean, it's inescapable. Yeah. Like, nothing that anything that claims to be objective is maybe lists of data is objective, but even then, someone selected what data you're looking at.
Right.
And,
what do they leave out?
So when people say, "Oh, be careful of that mention," I just think, "Fuck off!" Like, let me deal with the text, and because that stuff's obvious. Like, especially when you look at text all the time. But really, it started with Egypt and megaliths. With a lot of stuff like this, I loved Egypt. Everyone, when you're a little kid, Egypt is fascinating, and I think probably talking of people's roots, I think I did Ben to Randall to you or something like that. But I think I started out with Ben, and I think one of the first things I wanted was I just wanted to see beautiful Steadicam photography of pyramids and things like that, which you just
you went to the wrong place.
Before.
Ben can't do Steadicam. He's terrible at it.
He has a Steadicam. Or he had some technology which is meant.
We're always ragging each other on how terrible we are at taking video.
But I mean, I don't know if you guys remember, up until before 2020 especially, if you wanted to look at photos of an ancient site and you Googled it, you'd get the same 5 photos taken at different times a day but all, maybe slightly bit further out or slightly closer in, but it would just be the same thing all the time.
That's right.
So
It was all tourist photos. Nothing of anybody who was there with the purpose of
Yeah.
researching. Kyle and I discussed this like long before we started the podcast. I had this idea of like, can we go to these places and get good footage for people who want to do research, not just, oh, look at this pretty place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, that was the first thing that blew me away with Ben's stuff. And Hugh Newman's a good one for that as well. Is just like really good quality images of the interesting things that we want to see at the site. Not just just
I totally agree with that.
But and that really, that it just got me really excited, especially because, I mean, as I've said to you guys before, I come from an area where there's granite everywhere, and there's 5,000 years of granite working history that you can go and look at. And I think the first thing that got me was Yusuf saying you can't make a Serapeum box out of surface granite. And I was like, oh yeah, whatever. And then I started looking around, and even the biggest chunks of granite lying on the surface, you would probably just maybe fit a box in there. But then, of course, it's surface granite. It's going to flake away. You're going to lose bits. It's going to crack. You need that solid granite. And I remember just walking around some of the outcrops and thinking, God, he's right. This, okay, straight away, this is something interesting. And then it just went from there, really. And then
Yusuf, I also thought of Yusuf when you were talking about propaganda and text. Like he often reminds us when we're looking at the stuff in the temples and everything. He's like, it's propaganda.
Yeah.
You're looking at this massive relief with the pharaohs and all this stuff is happening in the battle and all the gods and everything. And Yusuf is like, this is remember, it's all propaganda.
Yeah. Which is why I think that the general populace in Egypt could read hieroglyphs.
Probably, yeah.
I don't think it was the language of the scribes, because else you'd just have a wall of propaganda and gibberish. Doesn't make sense to me.
True.
But I don't know.
That's
maybe
true.
I don't.
That's a good point.
So yeah, and then I was, I thought, well, I want to look at what's around me, because I can't go to Egypt or Peru or something like that. So what we've got around this, there should be some good stuff to see. And then I came across a video, and I think it got to that point in lockdowns where I was just watching stuff on YouTube because it had a funny title, like oh, this will take up 30 minutes of me sitting down doing nothing.
Yeah.
And I watched one that was called the King Arthur Conspiracy, and I thought, that just sounds hilarious. Like, come on. And I watched it, and I started listening to what these guys were saying, and I started sort of doing a bit of Googling, and some of it kind of checked out in a way. And
they got you.
They got me, yeah. And they were talking about texts and characters and places from this British tradition, which I'd never heard of. Like, I just didn't get it. And so when I talk to Trevor, I call King Arthur like a cherry on the icing on the cake. Like, everyone goes in for Arthur, but then you find the beautiful cake beneath it, right? My friend Adam, who I do some recording with, he says it much clever, and he calls him a psychopomp, a demon that leads you to greater knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we have in Britain, is we have a culture which is kind of split east-west rather than north-south or by our modern borders. And the western side of Britain, which we call the Celtic fringe today, this was inhabited by people we called the Britons. So you've heard of Arthur, King of the Britons.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a meaningless phrase today because the whole island is called Britain. But if you go back to, say, the 1600s, you wouldn't call an English person a Briton. You wouldn't call a Scottish person a Briton. Like, they would say, no, I'm not. Welsh people are Britons. Wales is that bulge on the left-hand side of Britain with its own separate language and separate history. One very famous Welshman made the word Britain applicable to the whole the whole nation, shall we say, the whole island. And that man's name was John Dee. You may have heard of him.
Yeah.
In fact, he's an incredibly brilliant piece of propaganda. He is at once they were calling England Britain. At the same time, they were trying to ban the Welsh language and bring English laws into Wales. And you get this over and over again, because essentially, Britain is ruled from London today, and the British Empire started as England and its powerhouse as it slowly took over the various nations of the island and then spread out from there. So the propaganda of that nation has been very important for a very long time. I mean, it became the most powerful empire in the world. So how these people styled themselves and how they claimed their history was very important. So when John Dee claimed Britain for England, he was then claiming all of the other prophecy that went alongside, all the history, all the right to rule. So, for instance, Arthur is the king who's meant to return, who's sleeping in Avalon, and then he is said to come back and rule the Britons, and then lead Britain to a time where it had an empire that spanned the world. I mean, that's written 600 years before the British Empire was formed. Right? But John Dee manages to capture that and then make that about English power by making the whole place Britain. So it's a brilliant piece of work. John Dee is a genius in lots of ways, and not a very nice one as well.
Yeah. An evil magician.
Yeah. And there's a lot of interesting stuff that comes out around that period, particularly to do with Joseph of Arimathea as well. There's a fantastic letter from Queen Elizabeth I to the Pope saying, your religion's younger than mine. We had Joseph of Arimathea founding our Christianity in Britain. You had Peter turn up decades later. How can you tell me what to do?
Wow.
Right? So this is why it's really important for people over the time in this country to assume this history, to make it theirs, to buy into it in some way, because it's all wrapped up with the power, the right and the power to rule in Britain. Okay? That, as I say, that comes from the western side of Britain, the Welsh, because it was them who dominated this island for 500 years before the Romans even turned up. So that was when Britain was, they call it Brythonic now is the word. Celtic is the general term used. But Celtic can be a bit of a minefield word to use in this topic. You know, if you start going online and say, yeah, King Arthur was a king of Celts or something like that, someone might tear you a new one. Even you can go back to Tolkien. Tolkien wrote a really interesting speech for the British Celtic Association, which was in part of the University of Oxford's English department, and he did a keynote speech for them after the success of Lord of the Rings and that, and he described the word Celtic as a magic bag into which anything can be put and that anything can be taken out of. So it supports my argument that I call this Celtic, therefore it's Celtic. Doesn't support my argument that it's Celtic, therefore it's not Celtic anymore.
That's not.
Okay? So that's an issue with Celtic, right? This is we long called the church in the time of Arthur, the British church of that period, they used to call Celtic Christianity, associated with St. Patrick in Ireland, not work crosses, all that sort of stuff used to be called Celtic Christianity. But that formed arguably hundreds of years after the Romans showed up. And Britain was Romanized, in whatever that word means. So how can we use the word Celtic which is a prehistoric, pre-Roman term, and then apply that to something post-Roman and Christian? You know, it's a very, as I say, the word was just used however they wanted it to be used. You know, they just throw it out there. This is Celtic, this isn't, blah, blah, blah. So Brythonic is a bit more of an appropriate word. But it's, can I get a little picture up, actually? Is that all right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was
absolutely.
just going to say, just so we can understand the geography a bit better.
While you're pulling that up, did you ever watch the show The Last Kingdom?
The Last Kingdom, is that...
It's basically about the formation, or the sort of the formation of the British Empire,
Yeah, so
where they took all the different kingdoms and made them into one.
So the formation of England, yeah. So there was a
The
period
formation of
the
England, yeah.
Saxon states were called the Heptarchy, seven Saxon kingdoms. The Saxons sort of started arriving after the end of the Roman period in about 410
Yeah.
AD, and yeah, they formed the England, and that took about 500 years. So this is the really interesting thing. Saxon England wasn't really fully complete and set up and organized until about 900 AD, which is about 500 years after the Saxons started arriving. So we're talking about a really slow, grinding war, essentially. I mean, we can't really call it one war. It would have had vast periods of peace and cultural exchange and genetic exchange, which is a polite way of saying sex. There would have been a lot of things happen in that period. But this is the context of Arthur. Is that Arthur is a king that fights the Saxons, right? So this is why it's silly when some people say, "Oh, Arthur was a king of England," because he was fighting the English. So we can't really call him a king of England, right? Although they weren't really the English; they were Saxons. I mean, there's such a huge like a temporal issue here when people start talking about trying to claim where someone is from or who they were fighting. Is that, you know, you can't say King Arthur is Scottish because Scotland didn't exist in the time of King Arthur.
Yeah.
England didn't exist in the time of King Arthur. So,
But this reminds me, I mean, that's brilliant politics, really. Like what you were saying, what John Dee did is you just take control of the meaning of one word,
yeah,
and you can totally change the way the entire population thinks about themselves, you know, or thinks about others.
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
yeah. So, can you see this?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as you can see, the west of Britain and the north of Britain is uplands, and southeast is really the good flatter farming land, and this is the west and the north is good for your mining, grazing, cattle, stuff like that. When the Romans came, this is the sort of area they wanted, because this is at a time. So Britain is quite far north, but you can get 2 crops in a season, and obviously now that's a great thing. But in the first century AD, that was a very enticing thing for Romans. You know, that's a good way of feeding a military, having 2 crops a year. And there's a massive canal system that goes through Holland and down through Germany to northern Italy, which would carry food around and various other things. Britain was a huge producer of cattle as well, as I was saying. But they moved into this area. And then the western uplands, they're a lot harder to control. So it took the Romans probably about 100 years, really, to make their way up to the north and to conquer Wales and Western Britain. It took them a long time, a lot of time of hiding in forts, essentially, building relationships with the southern kingdoms, and then slowly making advances and various campaigns into the north and into Wales. What's really interesting about that is then that these western uplands, although they had that Roman influence, they really, we call them sort of un-Romanized. They don't have the big Roman cities. They don't have all the Roman coins. You know, you do find the coin finds and things like that, but in a lot smaller concentrations. These, you know, to the point where archaeologists in the past would say, yeah, the Romans came here, you know, swung their dick around a bit and then left, and didn't touch Britain for the next 400. Didn't touch those parts of Britain for the next 400 years. Now the view is changing a bit, but what's curious is about when the Roman power fell in Britain, it's those western upland, those least Romanized parts, which maintained Roman culture. So in the Saxons that came in were not Romanized at all. They weren't Christian, and they didn't maintain. You know, this is why we don't speak a Romance language, is because the Saxons invaded Britain. Essentially, that's why we have this weird bastard Germanic language that we speak. Whereas the Franks and the Goths and that, which were also on the borders of Roman territory, they started speaking Latin. They started practicing Christianity really early, which is why France and Spain and Italy all still speak that Romance language. In Britain, they maintained the use of Latin. They maintained building in Roman cities. They continued Christianity as well, which is something you don't often hear. In fact, that's actually a really good one to do. Is you just go on Google and Google when did Christianity come to Britain, and it will probably give you the wrong date straight away. It'll give you a date, like it'll probably give you 597 AD, but you know you can see Christians on Roman mosaics in the 4th century AD. And there's a propaganda element to that we can go into, but it was this, and it's this area, this sort of Roman maintained but also least Roman part of Britain where Arthur comes from. So the archaeology is really interesting from the period. Their monuments, like their grave monuments, they use Latin lettering, they use Latin inscriptions. Some of them have Brythonic names, some of them have Latin names, but they're carved onto standing stones. Right?
Oh.
You know, they re-inhabited Roman cities, you know, re-fortified the walls. I say re-inhabited, it was probably continually inhabited, but they, you know, renovated them and kept them going. Sometimes they built medieval style wooden halls in the center rather than the crumbling Roman buildings that would have been there. But not only did they inhabit these Roman buildings, but they also re-inhabited the Iron Age hill forts and re-fortified them. So you get this really interesting mix of archaeology, which is on the one hand pre-Roman and very Brythonic, and then on the other hand very Roman and more Roman than was happening in a lot of Northern Europe at the time because of the Germanic invasions. This, as I say, poses an interesting problem for Rome, because at this point in European history, the Roman Church is in shambles. It's all over the place. It's been, you know, it's been taken apart by the Germanics. They're slowly reorganizing it and incorporating themselves into it, but you know, church buildings have been burned, documents have been burned, and yet in this edge of Britain, there's people who've been practicing Christianity continually for up to 500, 600 years.
Were they doing it openly, or was it hidden?
Oh yeah. No.
Alongside other practices?
They were building churches. The problem comes with that date, 597, where a guy called Augustine or Austin arrives in Britain, and there's a problem between Catholic practices and British practices. The ones they talk about mainly is when they celebrate Easter, so how you calculate the date. So the British Church used an old Jewish calculation for Easter, and the Roman Church used a Roman one. And the other one was how to cut the tonsure. So obviously the classic Roman one is with the bold pate, and the rest of the hair, and the Celtic one is kind of like everything cut off except for a strip right at the front.
Oh, right.
Okay.
A head mustache.
My least favorite haircuts in medieval video games.
It's called the.
It just makes you want to punch those guys in the face.
Interestingly, they call it the tonsure
Sorry.
of Simon Magus. Simon Magus being a very influential Gnostic character. And is there a
I
link
don't know
to
why I hate those haircuts.
the Gnostic Church? Yeah. I don't know. Other than that, the Britons wore their hair long. There's a lot of talking. If they went into the church, they'd have their hair cut, and then when they left the church, they'd grow their hair long again as a sign of pride. And
I'm just saying, I can see why you would fight a war with those guys.
oh yeah,
Over that haircut.
so yeah. I mean, and they're the things they talk about openly. You know, is you calculate Easter wrong and you do your hair wrong, but there's definitely other things undercurrents boiling.
They didn't need any other reason.
Yeah.
I didn't like their hairdos.
Yeah. Listen, there's a whole lot of political stuff going on, but the main problem, aside from Easter, is your fucking haircut.
Yeah, you look ridiculous.
You need to all die because of this.
A lot of the problems also seem to come with in Britain. The priests can marry, and they could also live and practice their religion with their wives, which is something that the Catholic priests thought was abominable.
Yeah.
So this could be in fact, recently there's been a discovery in Wales of what looks like a 6th century nunnery. They've got really fine crockery and glassware and lots of female burials, which are in really nice rock-cut graves, and they've got all quite nice goods and things like that. So, which is very, very early for nunneries. So it's pretty interesting stuff. But 597's a bit ahead of Arthur, just a little bit. Arthur is seen as either a 5th or 6th century character, so the 500s, 400s, 500s, right, or the cusp in between the two, really. The problem with our Arthurian material is that it's late, so most of it dates from the 10th or 11th century onwards. So that's 500 years after our time with Arthur.
You mean
The storytelling starts at that time.
Okay, the documents that we have now that we can date, the earliest ones are to that period.
The physical evidence and documents you have now are 500 years after he was supposed to be around.
Yeah, and some of that you can judge by the content. You can say there's definitely, like, by the language used, you can say, oh, this is a 13th century manuscript, but because of the language used, they're probably copying from something which is a lot older than that. The thing is about this Arthur, these documents, though, is that they don't just talk about the time of Arthur, the 6th century, which British historians and archaeologists essentially treat as prehistoric today, because we'll get into the fact that they don't like these sources at all now. The
real quick, I was going to ask the other question I was going to ask about these like still Roman, non-Roman places in the uplands that you were talking about. Are there documents from there? Is it only architecture and there's no writing?
The inscribed,
except for the graves and things.
The memorial stones. They are the most documents we have. So the problem with us in Britain as well is that it's not a good place to keep paper.
Yeah.
So, or animal skins, or all the other things that they recorded on in that period.
It's too wet.
Too damp. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big problem.
What about the ice? Just stored in the ice.
Yeah, you know what? I mean,
like, we don't have caves or dry place, but you freeze it.
I mean, it's interesting because a lot of people will say, "Oh, there's no written sources from the period," and completely ignore the inscribed stones. And in fact, this is a big mission of mine: is the inscribed stones, because they are awesome things. Like, some of them are massive. They have these fascinating inscriptions on them, which date to the time of King Arthur, possibly, if you believe that, you know. And they are, you know, like tucked in behind a church, like with the inscription fading in the rain, or stuffed in the back of somewhere with chairs stacked against it. And, you know, people don't even know what they are or where they're from. I mean,
Need to scan them. Scan all of them.
It is happening. Fortunately, it is
Cool.
happening.
That kind of reminds me of the church that Hugh Newman took us to, and we like opened the trapdoor.
Oh, yeah.
And there's like a standing stone beneath the floor of the church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got one
like, yeah.
nearby where it's like holding up the lintel of a pub. There's just a standing stone in the middle of the bar holding up the roof.
Preserve it forever.
We've been drinking it for thousands of years.
I'd
built
say
a
they were
building
just
around
like,
it.
They just went there and were like, well, this stone's in the way. And they're
Build a
like,
pub out of it.
can you just build around it? Like,
It sucks drinking out here in the rain.
but yeah, they're amazing things, and they're so undervalued. They're absolutely. I got some lovely pictures of some, but some of them are really interesting actually because not a lot of them have obviously recognizable names from the period, but some of them do, and some of them link very interestingly with the history, and a lot of mainstream scholars are quite happy to jump on and say, no, it's nothing to do with it. It's just a coincidence. I'll run through one quickly, actually, because it's my favourite. Have you heard of, if I say Tristan and Isolde, do you know what I'm talking about?
I think, yeah, Tristan sounds...
No.
Tristan, yeah. So it's a very famous romance. It was one of the Arthurian romances, but it's the love story was particularly popular. So I think there's a Wagner opera, Tristan and Isolde. It features these two lovers. Tristan is sent by his guardian or uncle, King Mark of Cornwall, to go and pick up a new wife for him, who's Isolde. When he goes to meet Isolde, they fall in love and then have to deal with the fact that King Mark is not going to be very happy about this, essentially. So they run away together. There's various versions and things like that. So, in a 9th century life of a guy called Paul Aurelian, the author talks about a very much historical character in Brittany, in northern France, called Conmore. Now, Conmore, as I say, he is quite happily historical. He appears in lots of different documents and from different countries as well. So he's quite well attested. And the writer of this life says, King Mark and Conmore are the same person. Right, he just says it straight out. They are the same person, right? A lot of people don't agree with this. They're like, no, he's got that wrong. They can't possibly be the same people. It's two separate traditions from two separate places. But in Cornwall, where King Mark is from, by the way, not where Conmore's from, where King Mark is from, there's an inscribed stone that says Drustanus, which is an accepted Latin version of Tristan, son of or successor to Conomorius. Right? So we have a tradition that links Tristan and Mark, a document that links Mark and Conmore, and a stone that says Tristan, son of Conmore. How much more attestation do you need? And
It's pure coincidence.
This is it's a coincidence. Yeah.
But wasn't Tristan supposed to be one of the knights? Isn't that in
absolutely.
the...
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
okay, that's where I recognize the name.
So Mark is said to be he's described in some places as him and Arthur are sons of two sisters, so first cousins, through their mothers, which is possible. Some people now, because there aren't early stories that directly link Arthur and Mark, people will now go, oh no, it's two separate traditions which have just come together in the romances and they're not related at all. Although you find people related to both of them, round and about.
Yeah.
Like Tristan's real father and his other uncle. So that's interesting. You've basically got this stone which says this, but no, it's a coincidence. There's another guy called...
Why did they want it to be a coincidence instead of...
I think this comes from...
What's the driving reason?
I think this comes from the change in academic outlook. So up until the 1960s, saying that you thought that Arthur was a historical character was pretty much the mainstream idea. They might have put some conditions to that, saying, he was maybe just a local king and it's been blown out of proportion a bit or something like that.
Like with the floods. It was
Yeah.
a local flood, blown out
Absolutely.
of proportion.
And then in 1960, well, 1960s-ish, a chap called David Dunville, who's still basically the leading authority, announced that all of the earliest evidence about Arthur is inadmissible. And everyone just went along with it. So now, if you are, say, someone getting into this today, and you start reading through what the antiquarians have to say, and you think, oh, this is exciting, yeah, this could be this place, this person could be this person, I can make these connections. You go and look at modern scholarship, there'll be none of that, because they don't make arguments about Arthur anymore, because they don't have to, because it's a load of rubbish. They don't have to deal with any of the evidence, because it's not evidence to them.
Did he give a reason for it being inadmissible? It just
Well, I'm reading one book at the moment, which was published a few years ago, but the author of that, Christopher Gidlow, was basically saying that at the time of writing that book, David Dunville's work was still unpublished, so we just had to take his word on it.
oh, shit.
I don't even know if it's published now. I honestly don't. But it's some of the arguments you get see some of the arguments presented, and they're not brilliant.
But doesn't that sound like there's something else going on? I mean, I know you don't want to get too conspiratorial, but like you've already talked about like how John Dee takes command of this one word and changes all this stuff. So it's like it's almost like, okay, we need to erase this whole this entire saga and get rid of it for some other reason.
Yeah.
I mean, so you just have some respected academic announce that all this evidence is inadmissible in modern academia and doesn't fit their strenuous,
absolutely,
whatever, and everyone's like, oh, okay, well, crap, and then just accept it.
And it's interesting because it is almost directly targeted at Arthur. So what's really interesting is that the earlier sources we have for Arthur, although they're quite late, there's also some of the earlier sources we have for some other people. A really good example is a character called Ambrosius. So in Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae, which is basically the first narrative story we get about Arthur, there are earlier sources, but they're kind of little snippets and bits and bobs, little mentions and things like that. Historia Regum Britanniae gives us the first narrative of his life, and this book is hated, by the way, by academics. They hate Geoffrey of Monmouth. It's despite, and Geoffrey of Monmouth is full of a lot of fantasy. I'll give you that. But there are in that book anyway, Ambrosius is described as Arthur's uncle. But in the earlier sources where we find Ambrosius and Arthur as well, you'll find. So, for instance, in the Historia Britonum, this is probably one of the first mentions of Arthur. It's a 9th century annals sort of thing. It's not really an annals. It's not like a list of years, but it's, like a series of short sections, roughly in chronological order. Ambrosius is a figure who is a prophetic child who sees that there's some dragons fighting under a castle and gets the king to release them in order to solve the problems that this king is having building his castle, King Vortigern, who's very important in the Arthur story as well. Whereas Arthur just appears as a king who fights 12 battles. However, Ambrosius is considered historical and Arthur is fictional. So Ambrosius has this really wild, crazy introduction to the histories of doing this crazy stuff, but he's considered historical. Arthur, who just fought 12 battles against the Saxons, that's fictional. And essentially what you find...
Is Ambrosius a common name?
No, no, not at all. It's he's probably one of the... He's the only character in Welsh tradition with that name.
Welsh, doesn't it remind you of, ambrosia?
Yeah. So
the food of the gods.
Yeah. So the Greek, it's a Greek name. I think the Latin, the Latin version is not far off though. I think it's pretty much the same. In Welsh, it's Emrys or Embris, but it means the same thing, which is eternal or divine.
Okay. Yeah.
He's also the genesis of the Merlin character, Ambrosius. So when Geoffrey first mentions Merlin, he calls him Merlin Ambrosius and kind of conflates him. Like he almost makes one character out of two.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Like giving Arthur I mean, like, how many ancient heroes had one parent who was a god and another who was a human, right? So
Yeah.
they're always the half breeds, the Gilgameshes and the
But
Heracles.
Ambrosius is a real person, Russ.
Right, he's totally real.
Yeah,
Just,
he's real. He wasn't a
release some
divine god.
dragons.
He was just a bloke. But his nephew was fictional. And this is what's fascinating about the whole oeuvre of Welsh tradition. This whole, we're talking about thousands and thousands of manuscripts, stories that go back, what we call prehistoric in Britain. We've got thousands of documents in Britain which pertain to the period that we call prehistoric.
That is weird. Yeah. I associate prehistoric with like before documents, I guess. Before writing. Yeah.
Yeah. So how we're sort of generally taught it in this country is that you have your prehistory up till about 55 BC, when Julius Caesar made his first attempt at conquering Britain. The great, brilliant joke is that Julius Caesar was so successful that first year that he had to come back the next year and do it again. And then he was so successful the second time that not a Roman soldier stepped foot on Britain again for another 100 years. Right.
They're like, well, we got history going.
Yeah.
We'll
And
come back later in 100 years and see how y'all are doing.
Julius Caesar's like, I did so well there that I'm running away. In fact, there's a famous Latin poem actually which takes the piss out of Caesar, and it says the end line is something like, "To the Britons who he bravely showed his back."
Oh yeah, Sir Robin. He's Sir Robin. Yeah.
So we get a bit of a start there with Caesar, and then 100 years later we get the Claudian invasion in 43 AD, and then we have some records which are the Roman records up until about 400 AD. Then it goes black again, and then things start to accumulate again around 900, 1000 AD, and then 1066 is the big important date in British history, which was the Norman conquest, where essentially our ruling class was replaced by the Normans, and they are still essentially the aristocrats who own most of the land in this country today, or their descendants are anyway. And this was a big change in things like taxation and land ownership. So suddenly we get loads of documents which are listing out places, how many people live there, how many animals are there, basically how much money it generates. That really starts in that 1000 AD period. But as I say, we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of documents which pertain to the periods that they now call prehistoric or the Dark Ages. So there's a really great book actually. It's a classical dictionary. So it's a dictionary of names and places from Welsh tradition up to 1000 AD. And it's by a guy called Peter Bartram. And you basically, you can go through it like a dictionary. I'll send you a link to it. It's great. And you just go through, look at the names, and it'll show you all the references to where these names are. As I say, that book goes up to 1000 AD. But all the information comes from documents written after 1000 AD. They can fill a huge book full of these people who weren't recorded until after they were meant to have lived. There are exceptions, don't get me wrong. But this is the case when you get to something like Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae, is that you have a book that is full of names, dates, events, and you could get 10 different scholars to go through it, and each one could pick out a different character, a different name, and a different event, and say historical, fictional, historical, fictional, historical, fictional.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't all line up. You know? One guy would say, yeah,
Yeah.
he's historical, and the next guy would come along and say, no, that's not historical. You know, it happens time and time and again, to the point where you've essentially got this whole chronology, essentially, and a whole selection of interrelated people who is almost impossible to separate out what's real and what's not, and no two academics can agree on it. So when it comes to ideas of like pseudo history or pseudo archaeology, one thing that archaeologists like to say is that when the public encounter history, they see it in snapshots, and they don't see that behind the scenes we've got a really carefully worked out chronology with evidence, blah 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 blah. Well, that's just not true in the Dark Ages, or the early medieval period as we call it. There is no consensus. It doesn't exist. You can't call someone disagree. You can't say that someone is a pseudo-history or pseudo-archaeologist for disagreeing with the consensus, because there is no consensus for early medieval Britain, especially in the western areas.
But do they still call people pseudo-archaeologists for... Do people still get called that?
Oh, yeah.
For their views?
Oh, yeah, especially on Arthur.
Yeah, okay.
Believing in Arthur is akin to UFOs and Bigfoot. That's why I'm here.
Wow. All right.
That's why I'm
You're in
on
the right
front
place.
of the serpent.
Perfect. So I should probably take a break. It just started raining at the vineyard, and they're supposed to start pulling fruit.
Yeah.
So I got to make a call, but we got a great setup here for all the historical, the purpose of controversy and all that. But I want to hear the story, because I'm not really familiar with,
great.
like,
Okay.
why is this so significant? You know what I mean? Tell me the story of Arthur as you see it from your research perspective.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Yeah, when we'll come back, I'll talk about the early sources and then the narrative story that we get from that.
Great.
And then,
Excellent.
cool. Bro, sounds good.
Awesome.
All
Thank
right.
you. Okay, we're back.
Get on.
Yeah,
Crisis averted.
Well, I mean, no, we just called
Crisis
off harvest.
ongoing.
Yeah, crisis ongoing. Called off harvest for tonight. So yeah,
So I can stay up late
Hope-
playing video games.
yeah.
Sweet.
I'll test the fruit tomorrow in the morning. I mean, we could stand to lose some bricks, like the percentage of sugar could go
okay.
down a little bit because we're making rosé. So it's like
Yeah.
it's okay. It was a little high, honestly.
Okay.
So maybe the rain will bring it down slightly, and it'll still be good, and we can harvest tomorrow night.
Good.
I don't know.
Sounds
Is
good.
there a reason
We'll see what this rain does.
Is it the heat?
Yeah, we do it at night because it's so hot during the
it's
day.
too hot.
And really you prefer the fruit to be cool so that the fermentation, or well, for whites and rosés, we actually once we press the juice, we chill the juice to settle out the particulates and stuff. The sludge.
Before you start the fermentation.
So it's better when it's cold.
Yeah,
I mean, if it comes in hot, it just takes longer to get it cold, And the crew is working out there. You don't want to be picking
From
grapes
what
in
I've heard,
100
it's really
degree
hard
weather.
work anyway. So
It's terrible.
Yeah. So we did day harvest at first, and we just found out like, no, doing it at night is so much better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
fair enough. So we're gonna dive in with some sources. Sources.
Yeah, sources, and we want to hear the story. Like, tell us the story.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So we'll go through some sources, and hopefully we'll build up a bit of a story.
Okay.
need
So
some
the
popcorn.
earliest one I mentioned was called Historia Britonum. This is the 9th century history, and it's a very short entry for Arthur, and it basically lists him as a very successful leader of battles. They use the term Dux Bellorum for him, not necessarily king, but Dux Bellorum, and he fights these, sorry, not 10 battles, 12 battles. He fights these 12 battles, and he's incredibly successful. One of them, he's definitely recorded as a Christian king. They talk about him wearing an image of the Virgin Mary on his shoulders, and there's lots of different interpretations about what that can mean, whether he had it on a shield or whether he had it on a cape or something like that. A lot of ink has been spilled over that question. I don't know why it's so important to some people, but I think it's just essential to say that he was definitely a Christian king. And he was very successful. And he seems to be very successful against the Saxons in a time where we see sort of a cessation in Saxon activity. So the Saxons have come into the east of the island, really, and first established themselves there. And then there's sort of this westward movement of them. And it gets to this point around 500 AD, where suddenly they kind of just stop, right? They grind to a halt. And Saxon victories suddenly become very quiet in the records. You know, up to this point they were going, yeah, we won this battle, and we won this battle, and then it just goes very quiet for a bit, right? And then at 600 AD, it kind of starts again. So the next entry we get is from an annals. It's called the Annals Cambriae, the Annals of Wales. Actually, this is a cool one. I did this with Trevor. You know, if I say Cornubian, Devonian, Silurian, Cambrian, Ordovician, you know, I'm talking about geological ages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they all come from the literary names for parts of Britain where the rock types of those ages were first identified. And a lot of them are from the Britain side. So the historical Arthur that I favour, that theory is called the Silurian Arthur hypothesis. Which is kind of snaky because it links it back into the Silurian hypothesis.
You know, the Silurian hypothesis itself, yeah.
That is cool.
Cambria is a name for Greater Wales. They call themselves the Cymry, Wales and Welsh being possibly later terms that just mean like Romanized foreigner. And you get it in other parts of the world as well, like Galicia in Spain. Wait, that's not the right word. Not Galicia. Sorry, my brain did two different things there. Yeah, we'll go to Wales later anyway. So we get the Annals Cambriae, and we get two mentions for Arthur. What's interesting is they're the first non-religious mentions in this. The first secular mentions in this Annals. Up to that point, they're talking about churchmen and when they were born and when they did important things and things like that. And then suddenly we've got a king there. And the two mentions, they talk about the Battle of Badon. Badon is also the 12th battle on the previous battle list that we saw. And then the next entry is about the Battle of Camlan, where Arthur and Mordred fell. Right, so this is Arthur's death. We get a couple of...
Did he die in the 12th battle or after?
Well, Camlan isn't listed in the 12 battles. This is an extra one. It's the 13th battle. You never have a 13th one. You're gonna die.
Yeah.
Unlucky 13.
He probably had some more. So there's ideas. Possibly either the 12 battles were recorded before and written down, and that tradition survives before Camlan even took place, or possibly Camlan is very much seen as a civil war. So the 12 battles are 12 battles against the Saxons in particular. Camlan might not have been included because it's a civil war. Because Mordred is Arthur's nephew. And it was him that seemed to raise a rebellion against Arthur.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's like the bad guy in the
absolutely.
story. Yeah.
Some of the earliest references to Medrawd, as he's called in Wales, are actually quite flattering, though. I mean, he was clearly a highborn and very important person before he gained this reputation as Arthur's evil nephew, essentially. So I'm going to skip forward a couple of bits and bobs that we have of mentions of Arthur and go to Geoffrey of Monmouth. Geoffrey is the first one, as I say, to present an entire story of Arthur's life. And what's really fascinating is, despite the fact that Geoffrey is absolutely torn apart as fiction and legendary and all this sort of stuff, is that his account of Arthur is pretty, just like the account in Nennius in Historia Brittonum, is pretty plain. You know, he does stuff that's fairly reasonable for an early medieval king to do. You know, he fights battles and he wins
fantastical.
battles. Yeah, not fantastical. Yeah. So his life starts fairly fantastically. Let's go with that. So it all starts with Uther Pendragon. Uther Pendragon has had lots of success against the Saxons, and he has set himself up, and they have a bit of a celebration because they've just defeated. They've driven the Picts. The Picts are in what we call Scotland now, right in the top of Scotland, and they've had some success against the Picts and the Saxons, and so they're having a bit of a get together. And his right hand man, who's called Gorlois, Earl of Cornwall, he's got his wife Aegir there with him, and Uther Pendragon is absolutely smitten. He wants Aegir badly, and he wants her so badly that he goes to war with his chief advisor. Right. Uther Pendragon does not come out well at all in Geoffrey of Monmouth. Or at least in this section, anyway. So he takes his army down to Cornwall. This is where all the tin comes from, I was talking about earlier. And he gets Merlin to create some drugs, is the word they use, and those drugs are meant to give Uther the appearance of Gorlois, right? So he can break into Tintagel Castle, and he then sleeps with Aegir in the disguise of Gorlois, and that's how Arthur is fathered. So Arthur is a bastard straight off, and Arthur gets basically taken away and secreted again with one of his advisors. So in the later tradition, he's called Sir Ector or Sir Antor, that becomes Arthur's advisor, who's the father of Sir Kay. And in Welsh tradition, he's called Cynnar of Caergoch. And Arthur basically sort of stays in the wings until he's 15. A couple of other people have served as High King in between. One in particular, who's called Loth, or in Welsh tradition, he's called Llay or Lw. And Arthur then... basically, Loth isn't doing too well. He doesn't have the confidence of the soldiers. So Arthur, at a very young age of 15, basically gets elected to be a general and a leader of battles. It's odd in Geoffrey is that Arthur seems to have like 2 coronations. He has one at this very young age, and then he has another one later on when he's much more established. And this is really interesting because one of the criticisms people have of the Arthur myth is that in a lot of the early sources, Arthur is not called King Arthur at all. He's called Arthur the Soldier. And there's even quite a suggestion that he is not as highborn as some of the kings, or not as important. So the idea that he has 2 coronations is quite interesting. One as first just becoming this general, this battle leader, and then one later on when he's actually established himself properly and he's going, no, I am in charge now, basically. So
king.
So Arthur then say he ascends to being the king, or at least the general of the armies of the kings of Britain, and he goes on a spree. He's incredibly successful. Basically, conquers all of Britain. He then goes on to conquer Iceland, Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway. You know, the whole lot. Denmark. There's, of course, Arthur's European campaign, and this gets to the bit where it starts to stretch credulity, and a lot of people get very critical of Geoffrey, is that Arthur just basically goes on and conquers all of Europe. This is something that John Dee loved, because then he could say that Iceland and Norway and Sweden belong to the British Crown. You know, we can, you know, there's all sorts of things, all sorts of propaganda that's sort of wound up in this, and would have served also even earlier medieval kings. I mean, already in the 9th century, you had Canute, who was a Viking king, and he was king of an empire which included like Sweden, Denmark, and Britain. Right. So this idea of basically being kings of large areas of northwestern Europe is not impossible or ridiculous, but it is generally seen as something that couldn't happen in Arthur's time, but did happen only a couple of hundred years later. You know, it's again one of these funny things of academia.
Yeah, I mean, and like Alexander is famous for
Exactly.
you know taking over an enormous amount. It's not impossible, right?
No, and Britain's small.
You have one extraordinary battle leader,
Genghis
and he
Khan,
just
bro.
goes out and
Yeah.
he's like, all of this will be mine.
It's getting better.
Huge tracts of land.
It's getting
Sorry.
better. It's getting better, but there is this really odd, like a cognitive dissonance in British history and archaeology. Whereas they can talk about the Roman period and go, yeah, we had these generals who were campaigning in Turkey, North Africa, and then coming to Britain and campaign. As soon as the Romans leave, you know, they'll be talking about, you know, a document will talk about a king in one part of the country, and then they'll have a similar name with a king in another part of the country, and the academics will go, well, it can't be the same person. They're in a completely different region.
Too far apart.
Yeah, too far apart. And you think, what do you mean too far apart? They're like 200 miles away from each other. On an island, which you can sail round, and you can sail up the rivers, and had loads of Roman roads by then, and all this sorts of stuff. If not pre-Roman roads. So Arthur has this, goes on then to conquer Europe as well. So he conquers France and Rome as well. And that's what's recorded on the Modena Cathedral archivolt, which has Arthur and his knights on this beautiful display in tiles, basically sieging Rome, I believe it is. And it's got several other of Arthur's knights are named on it. It's really interesting. So in medieval Europe, they were quite happy with accepting that Arthur conquered in Europe. But now we've got to this stage, they're not happy with it. So then what happens? Arthur gets a call back. His nephew's rebelling in Britain. He's met up with a load of Picts and Saxons, and he's bringing an army south. So Arthur then has to sail back from France, and he meets Mordred at Camlan, and they both die. Or at least Arthur suffers a mortal wound, which he then goes to get treated at Avalon afterwards. But the emphasis is on mortal wound. So what treatment they did, you know.
Yeah.
And that's essentially the story. There's no Grail. There's no Lady in the Lake. There's no... I can't think...
Merlin.
No, well, Merlin's in it, but he's kind of there before. He's not really there during Arthur's life. He's only there right at the beginning, and as I say, he's kind of confused with this Ambrosius character as well. So there's not a lot of. It's not a logic. I was speaking to Trevor, and I'd say that
He's just there. Yeah, he's just there giving him the drugs at the beginning.
Yeah,
so that
giving him the
Arthur
drugs.
can be
Yeah,
born.
that's right. I was saying to Trevor, like all of Merlin's magic is prophetic, essentially. He has the drugs.
Okay.
He moves Stonehenge. So Merlin's credited with building Stonehenge in Geoffrey of Monmouth. But even then, he describes. Some people say, I've said this before, and maybe it's in different versions of the manuscripts. Maybe it does say this, but people talk about him levitating the stones on. But in versions I've read, they talk about him using mechanisms, levers, pulleys. You know, which isn't magic. it's science, right?
I'd like to see the lever.
Hell yeah, right. Yeah. Especially for them Sarsens.
I stood next to those stones.
What's interesting
Yeah.
is that the quarry site for the smaller stones, the blue stones, is in a part of West Wales that was known as Ireland, or known as Irish for quite a long time. And Merlin was said to have got the stones from Ireland. So, is there buried in that not real story an actual real 5,000-year-old truth?
Yeah.
Wow. That's cool.
So one of the most famous pilgrim routes in Europe is St. David's pilgrimage. It was in the 1200s, it was on a par with the San Compostela, which is a very famous pilgrim route in Spain. If you did St. David's or San Compostela, it was worth twice going to Rome, right, in terms of what the reward you got in heaven. The St. David's Pilgrim Way walks past the Blue Stone Quarry. And when I say past it, I mean like it's there.
Wow.
As well as several other ancient megalithic monuments before you then eventually get to St. David's.
Does it imply why he built it or just says
Yeah, it's a monument to the dead, to the dead of the Saxon Wars. In particular, there's said to be a peace conference which Vortigern and the Saxons organised. They invite 300 of the cream of the crop of the British royalty. There's meant to be no weapons there, and then on an order, the Saxons draw out their knives and basically executed 300 Britons. This is fictional, according to modern academics, although it's repeated time and time again as like a big thing which seemed to affect the psyche of the people of the time. You know, it seemed to be a serious thing, and now it's like, oh no, it never happened. You know.
Yeah. We didn't do that.
Yeah, but the monument was. Sometimes people say for the war dead generally, but sometimes it's specified for this, the people who died at this peace conference. And do you know what? Stonehenge does have that feel of a memorial.
A memorial, yeah.
You know, it looks like modern Second World War memorials or something, but without the names on it. You know,
Right.
but there's plenty of evidence that suggests Stonehenge is much older than that. There's plenty of science,
Sure.
but it's really interesting because Stonehenge is completely unique as a stone monument in Britain. There isn't anything else like Stonehenge in Britain. There's other big stone monuments, there's other big stone circles, but that style of worked stones with carpentry joint masonry attached, there's nothing else like that. It's completely anomalous. So that's why I kind of like the story, because there's kind of a suggestion that it is something different. You know, it's not just this part of all our other megalithic monuments, that it's something kind of exceptional.
The other thing that it makes me think of, though, is that you've got this one plain version of the Arthurian legend where it's simple. Like he's a soldier. He's very successful. He gets, he moves up the ranks, obviously, wins these 12 battles. But then perhaps later someone took that story and that character and turned it into something else. Like turned it into something that also contained other hidden information. So then when you tie in Stonehenge, that now can be dated to much earlier than that. Maybe part of the real fantastical aspects of the Arthurian legends are actually talking about something much older, like encoding a much, much older story.
I think you've got it
into a modern version, right? Like we kind of see this happen over and over again in the myths.
Yeah,
over the
I think you got it bang on there. So, Geoffrey of Monmouth's account, that's a whole. Although it's got the story of Arthur, that goes back to the founding of Britain. So Britain was founded by the Trojans. Did you know that? No? Everyone in Britain knew it for 1,000 years. Now no one knows it. That's a long story, which we won't necessarily get into now. But that's where the book starts. And, Arthur is basically towards the end of the book. And there's a lot of fantastical stuff in it. But for some reason, the Arthur bit, it's Geoffrey's account which then spawns every single romantic tale of Arthur afterwards. So Chrétien de Troyes is the kind of person first cited as being the first romance writer, but he was writing after Geoffrey, so about 50 to 100 years afterwards. But then from then on, these things exploded all over Europe. Italy, France, Germany, Spain, Scandinavia all have their Arthurian romances, right?
See, the technology
But
works.
he totally didn't go and take over all those places.
But yeah, well, that's funny actually, because the countries which are known for producing Arthurian romances fit really well with what his European conquests were.
Yeah, no, he definitely wasn't there.
I mean, I'm not sold on it, but I do think that's very interesting as well.
But it's also suggestive that like what we talk about is this technology of creating mythology. Like creating that story that just spreads. Mm-hmm. And in the story is contained this hidden information. Like obviously it worked. Like you have the first romanticizing of the story and then like...
Yeah.
But that's
It
not to
spreads.
say that Welsh legend and Welsh myth isn't full of fantastical stuff. And there's some very interesting set of stories. They're called the Mabinogion, right? And the Mabinogion, the first 4 stories are called the Mabinogi, right? This is interesting because
Weren't
Mabinogion...
those supposed to be...
Sorry, go on.
Isn't a Mabinogi like a what would you call it? Like a first level druid or something? They were the students of the druids.
You get
the
you get bards, ovates, and druids are the 3 sections of. But you might have read. The thing is, Russ, is that this stuff is so accessible to some people that you may have read some fantasy where someone uses that word in order to.
Okay.
Because you will find this so much. The matter of Britain is kind of fallen out of favour consciously, but subconsciously it's just bubbling under the surface, right?
Okay.
So take Conan the Barbarian, right? The guy who wrote that. All of the names and ideas from Conan the Barbarian come from one very short paragraph on an introduction to the matter of Britain. So the name Conan comes from a guy called Conan Meriadoc, and you might know the name Meriadoc from Lord of the Rings as well. What else about Conan? So Conan was a Hyperborean. Hyperborea is meant to be the mythical Greek cold continent in the north, which obviously Britain has long been associated with. He also gets associated with a group called the Cimmerians. Now, the Cimmerians are like Scythians from like Turkey area, and you think, well, how the hell is it? That name's got nothing to do with British history. So, what are you talking about, Peter? You're talking about shit, right? But a lot of antiquarians associated the Cimmerians with the Cymry of Wales and traced the Cimmerians from the Middle East to Wales. So you'll find a lot of antiquarian writings where they'll talk about the Welsh and the Cimmerians as one. So Conan the Cimmerian from Hyperborea, all of that comes from one small paragraph on an introduction to the matter of Britain that guy had in a book. And that's what I mean. It's just you'll know so much about these stories, but you don't even know you know it. You go to King Lear, the Shakespeare story. King Lear's a pre-Roman king of Britain, and that whole story comes from our ancient chronicles. And now people only know it as a Shakespeare story because Shakespeare, people know Shakespeare, it's accepted, great, but they won't talk about the source material because our source material is about Iron Age or Bronze Age Britain, which we don't have history for.
Damn.
Wow.
Okay, so it's very pervasive.
Yeah. Aegir, the mother of Arthur, who Uther Pendragon fell in love with, her father's said to be a guy called Amlord or Amblod, and that name is the Welsh version of Amleth or Hamlet.
Ah,
Right.
Shakespeare's involved, clearly.
There's
Yeah.
no. Oh yeah, Shakespeare knew a lot, definitely. He favoured a collection of histories called Holinshead's Chronicles, which was composed in the Tudor period. A lot of his stuff came from that. But Holinshead's Chronicles is fascinating and goes right back into the prehistoric period. So, yeah. I don't know where we were going now.
I just
Well,
interrupted
you got
you
sidetracked
with Mabinogi. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the Mabinogi.
You were talking
right.
about that. Yeah.
So so it's got these two names. We've got the Mabinogion and the Mabinogi. Mabinogion means, so loose translations. I think this one illustrates it the best. Mabinogion means children's stories. Mabinogi means creation stories.
Oh.
Okay, so you've got two very. There's a lot of implications in the words creation stories and a lot of implications in children's stories. Children's stories you can ignore. You don't have to worry about it. Maybe it's just something light-hearted for the children. Whereas creation stories can hold very important mythical and they're full of potential, political potential, religious potential. And the interesting thing about the Mabinogion and the Mabinogi that's inside it is that it seems to contain the British pre-Christian pantheon. So all the Roman and Greek gods that you see reoccur in Egypt, Scandinavia, the Middle East, all this stuff, there's a whole set for Britain as well, which again you don't really hear very often. And these stories, these are full of mythical. I say mythical information, very odd information. Some of it is definitely cosmic. So you'll have a knight who'll say, "Well, let's meet again here in a year and a day," and everything's always like in a year and a day. We'll meet here.
Yeah.
There's a really famous story about Rhiannon, who she's riding on a horse, and the knights try to catch her, but they can't. No matter how fast they ride, they can't quite catch up with her, right? And there's this idea of stars that are moving, but moving together and can't.
Yeah.
They don't catch up.
Always chasing.
Yeah.
Never catch up.
And people are.
Well, I was thinking that the 12 battles were
I mean, that all
Right, yeah.
sounds-
Celestial
So
as well.
this is one thing that comes up is that 12 is a bell ringing number, isn't it? It's a
and he has 2 coronations also, which I was trying to figure out what those could possibly be, but I'm waiting.
But,
Let's keep
but
going.
The reference where the book where we've got the 12 battles in, there's lots of recordings of kings who have lots of battles, and some of them have 8 battles or 9 battles or 2 battles or 4 battles. So I'm not sure how much the 12 is in this case an odd number. Some of the battles,
But it could be a reason for the source of the fantastical version.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
That's all.
there's, as I say, this is the cosmic element of Arthur is definitely there. The name Arth relates to this Proto-Indo-European arts or Arth, which means the bear, and is very closely associated with Ursa Major, or the Big Dipper, and therefore also Polaris as well, because the Big Dipper points to Polaris. So there is undoubtedly a cosmic element to Arthur, but I think this is something that is older and then has been accreted onto him afterwards.
Yeah.
So the information probably predates him. And this is what happens in the Mabinogi, is it's Arthur and his knights who play out the roles in the stories. But I think that before Arthur and his knights did that, there was probably some other characters who did that.
Some other characters
Yeah.
doing it, yeah. So,
So
same
then-
stories, but now we've got.
So you've got the round table, which is the sky,
Absolutely.
and then you have the knights of the round table,
Yeah,
like, going
Arthur in
around
the
and
center.
acting out this. Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, this
That's
is what
really
you
cool.
find with a lot of the romances. They're not about Arthur and what he does. They're about his knights,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah,
interesting.
the stories are about the knights.
Yeah.
And Brave Sir Robin.
But, we can talk about the knights as well, because, so these are people you can link to historical characters. And, okay, so one academic might say, well, they're legendary rather than historical. Like, we only know them from written sources. We don't have any archaeology to prove them. Another academic might say, "Oh no, they're purely fictional."
Yeah.
But we can you can go through them and look at them. What's a good one is Loth, for instance. So Loth, Arthur actually fights a little civil war with Loth because Loth doesn't think that this 15-year-old should take over. Basically, Loth's sons actually side with Arthur against their father. But Loth is in the Welsh versions called Llay, and he's called Llay ap Cynfarch, and you can link these to the kings of the north. His brother is called Urien Reged. He's very much a historical character and a king of northern Britain. In the Arthurian romances, he's called Sir Uriens. Urien's son is called Owain. He's Sir Owen. Sir Bedivere. He's called Bedwyr in the Welsh tradition. Sometimes he's called Bedwyr ap Pedroc, and Pedroc is a very historical saint in my local area. There's about 30 churches dedicated to him in the local area. Sir Kay, I mentioned earlier, he is imaginatively called Kay in the Welsh tradition. Not a lot of change there. Gawain is said to be a son of Loth. In the Welsh tradition, he's called Gwalchmai, which means something like the Hawk of May, or maybe the Hawk of the Plains. With Gwalch, this word means hawk or falcon, something like that. That one's really interesting, actually, because he's called Gwalchmai in the Welsh tradition. Almost immediately afterwards, he's called something like Walwyn or Gawain, right? And it's this second element of his name, this wun element, doesn't fit with the Welsh mai. There's a disconnect there, right? And this is something they'd normally blame on Geoffrey of Monmouth. They say, look, Geoffrey was the first person to have this version. We can see the Welsh tradition's different. He's buggered it up, and now everyone's followed him since and picked a name that's very similar to his version. But the problem is, just before that Geoffrey was writing, another English historian called William of Malmesbury records Walwyn. He talks about the grave of Walwyn, talks about him being the nephew of Arthur. Right. So we can't blame this on Geoffrey of Monmouth. But the problem is, William of Malmesbury is a golden boy of history. He's known for his great historiography. He's a Saxon Englishman. We love William of Malmesbury. So we can't knock him as a purveyor of misinformation about Arthurian information because he's liked, you know. Now, I'm not ratting on William of Malmesbury. I think he's great. But William also said the Britons say a lot about Arthur. A lot of it's fantastical, but it's based in real history. Now, he's not covering Arthur, so he doesn't say any more than that about that, but he is, as I say, a very well-respected historian, and he says, this isn't just nonsense, it's history. So,
Wow.
you know, there's all these threads, you know, where people will say, so you might read someone say, oh, Geoffrey of Monmouth invented the Trojan founding story. Well, no, it appeared in Historia Britonum 200 years before that. You know, Geoffrey of Monmouth invented the name Uther Pendragon. No, it's found in Welsh tradition and Welsh poetry before him. You know, time and time again, these things are just sort of like, just slung around like, oh no, this is fictional, just started here, this is this. But when you start looking closer and closer and looking at the details, you find there's a lot more complex picture going on. So much intertwined elements that are almost impossible to separate. You know, and the easiest way for the academics to dismiss it all is basically just take away the foundation it's on. Just say, well, it's just all nonsense. And then they don't have to deal with it. Then they don't have to pick it apart. Then they don't have to explain why they think what is fictional and what is historical.
So do you think that the reason that they're doing this is purely academic, or is there some other reason, like what Russ was asking before, why they would choose to get away from it? Does it just make their job easier? That just seems so weird. I mean, like, it reminds me a little bit of like Herodotus, because
Yeah, I was thinking Herodotus. and
historians
Strabo
like
and-
love him and also hate him
Yeah.
because they're like, he's writing all this stuff and he's adding like dialogue that he couldn't possibly have known. You know, like the general and this guy have this
Yeah.
little chat real quick before, and it's like this pivotal point in the story, and they're like, he made that up.
Yeah.
But he's their only source for anything going on, pretty much. He pay, you know, he. So it's like you see this struggle with historians dealing with Herodotus, where they want to dismiss so much of what he says, but they keep referring to him because he's writing. He's a prolific writer, and it's like the only picture that they have of what's going on.
Yeah.
What is it possible that this situation with Arthur is something like that, where they're just like, this is just can't be real, so they're getting rid of it and they're trying to find some other thing, or is it?
Absolutely. So it's much easier in the past to nail down reasons for why this sort of thing might be happening. So you could say that one person has used one part of the Arthurian story and not used another part because it serves their propaganda. So we can look at medieval kings like Henry II, who did something like that. Henry Tudor as well in the 15th, 16th century with his son and his son. He called his son Arthur, and he said his son Arthur would be the reincarnation of Arthur,
return.
to lead the Britain's return. Right. He flew the Welsh dragon and stuff. Tudor is a Welsh name. But when it gets to like the 60s, it's a lot harder to nail down. You can get your what's the word? Like confirmation bias, because the English academics, you know, they can read someone and say, "Oh, look, it's all crap," and then you can go and look back at Anglo-Norman historians who say the same thing, because it served their propaganda to do so. So maybe there's a bit of confirmation bias that way. But you're absolutely right, Kyle, that there's people who are... There is history that is so flaky. Egypt actually is a really good example. Egyptian history, like even we're not talking about 10,000 years ago, just Egyptian history, the Middle Kingdom or whatever, it's flaky as hell.
It's flaky. Yeah.
You know, it's based on tatters of papyri and propaganda that's written on walls and things like that. It's not scientific at all, but it's well accepted.
Yep.
So
Old Kingdom too. I mean, it's just like there's almost nothing.
Yeah, exactly. It's you've
Yeah.
got like the Scorpion King in a fucking Old Kingdom. I mean, it's like what the hell's going on there? But yeah, it's just really odd that I don't know. I mean, I don't want, again, I'm not trying to necessarily avoid politics or anything, but why in the 1960s there may have been some, I don't know,
Like a purposeful disconnect.
I mean,
from a long established
there is something
prehistoric story.
There could be a political element in as much as after the Second World War, there's a lot of national pride. And there was a big investigation into Arthurian sites. Tintagel, where Arthur was said to be what's the word I'm looking for?
Coronated?
No, not born, but before you're born, that bit.
Conceived.
Conceived.
Or conceived, yeah. So where he was said to be conceived.
Also confirmed.
Yeah, also confirmed. Is
Confirmed by nature.
there's like a late medieval castle there, right? And people would say, look, it was. They used to say in the past, look, it probably doesn't have anything to do with Arthur because that castle's late. It's got nothing to do with the period that Arthur was talking about. After the Second World War, did a lot of archaeology there, and they found a massive 6th century establishment. You know, lots of small buildings filled with, like, the most Mediterranean pottery they've ever found in one place in Britain from that period. You know, really nice stuff as well, amphorae and Byzantine stuff. Really good quality things, all on this little spot, which they just thought was a later medieval site. Cadbury Castle was also investigated as a suggestion for Camelot. And again, they found a 6th century hall there, which is pretty amazing. It's not big and grand and what you'd expect from a description in Camelot, but the archaeology is from the right period. in the right place.
Yeah.
And there was no doubt a reaction to this sort of nationalist endeavour of looking for the kings of Britain. Archaeology moved to be more interested in normal people, and what they do in their lives, and what they ate and how they lived and things like that. And maybe that ideological swing possibly also affected how the sources were viewed. But again, people still say, oh yeah, Ambrosius is historical, but he comes from exactly the same sources as Arthur.
Yeah.
So it's a real mess. Real certificate of ignorance job.
Like Kyle was saying, there's tons of that where they're like, we're accepting this part from this source because it already agrees with what we already believe, but this other part of this source is total bullshit, right? I mean, they do that all the time.
Yeah,
and often you try to find out, well, why is this part crap and this part is good? Because there's no, I mean, that happens, obviously, right? You could say, like, yes, this, like Pliny does this too, he's documenting all this stuff, and you're like, yep, this is, and then he says that he'll just state something that's completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And you're just like, okay, that part seems like total crap. But he's also just recording what he was told people think at the time. Strabo did this. Herodotus is like also recounting things he was told.
Yeah.
But sometimes it looks extremely arbitrary in terms of what modern academia has decided is true and has decided is false.
Yeah. There's such a community of repetition as well.
Right, but I also, like, I try to keep in mind that when something looks totally arbitrary or like it doesn't make sense, it's because you don't know their reasons. Somebody had a reason for this, and just because it looks like it makes no sense to me just means to me that I don't know their motivations.
Yeah.
That somewhere in this is some kind of hidden agenda. It may not be a nefarious one, but there's something that I'm not aware of that has made them completely discard this part for,
I mean,
and it may not be academic at all.
Me and Trevor have talked about the idea of things that like say crop marks. The study of crop marks up to a certain point in time was a very serious thing done by very serious people with a special name and things to study. And then suddenly it became a silly thing. It was it was just totally turned on. And now if you mention crop circles, you're immediately seen as an idiot, right?
Yeah.
And this seems to have happened with Arthur to some degree. There was a time when people would go, look, this is the serious stuff. This is just records a king from Britain. Yeah, we can separate it out from the fantastical stuff. And then suddenly it came to a point where they could no longer do that. For some reason, it was like, what you're talking about King Arthur? King Arthur's ridiculous. Do you believe in fairies and goblins and stuff like that as well?
Yes, and the association with other fantastical stuff.
Yeah, and
tell us the fairy and goblins story of Arthur.
Well, actually, do you know what? You did a lot in LP's episode on Little People. It's interesting.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Picts. Where they used to think the Picts were little people.
Right.
The Picts were just they were either a Scandinavian influence on Britons, or they were just completely unromanized Britons, one or the other. They're not really sure, or what it was. But yeah, it's quite funny that they just thought they were little people living in like grave mounds and firing little tiny arrows and stuff like that. That's funny. Although we could talk about giants. I mean, giants is interesting because so when Brutus the Trojan arrived in Britain, the place was just populated with giants, and they had to. Coroneus, who was his chief lieutenant, had to have a wrestling match with a giant in order to win the conquest of Britain, essentially, and he threw him off the side of a cliff. It's fascinating. But there's a lot of the problems might come from, there's a word in Welsh which is mawr, it's pronounced M-A-W-R, Sometimes it soft mutates to vour, but the Welsh word for giant is gower, right? So if you have someone, say, someone called Hoyle the Great, he'd be called Hoyle Vour, but that could be very easily read as Hoyle Gower. Hoyle the Giant.
Hoyle the Giant.
Right. So, yeah.
It's like you're saying it's somewhat like a whisper game.
Yeah, it could be. That's one. That's
Yeah.
one thing to say. But for instance, Gildas, who's worth mentioning because he is basically our one written 6th century source, but he doesn't mention Arthur, which is kind of annoying because and people go, well, Gildas didn't mention Arthur, but Gildas is writing a sermon, right? That's what he's doing. He's writing a piece of propaganda about how he feels like the British kings are being unchristian, and because they're being unchristian, it means that they are infighting and falling to the Saxons, basically. And that's what the whole piece is about. Is basically him criticizing these 5 kings for their unchristian behavior, and it's polemic. It's not a piece of history, but he uses historical elements to demonstrate his point. So some people read it as a straight history, but it's not at all. It serves his purpose. But his father's called Cor, and there's a story of St. Caddoc, who's a very famous saint, very much associated with Arthur as well, who goes to the north where Cor lives, and he digs up these huge bones, right, which are said to be Cor's bones. But Cor is, again, one letter off Cower, which is giant. So...
But they probably did dig up huge bones.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, Britain was covered in mammoths at one point. So
Yeah, exactly. No, oh, come on, bro. You sound like an academic now. Oh, it's just mammoth bones.
It's mammoth bones.
mammoth bones.
I've heard the same thing about the Cyclops, the mammoth
No,
skulls.
I mean, there's definitely
Elephant
some
skulls.
very big skeletons dug up here. So
Yeah.
Hugh Newman.
I was
won
just
for
giving you
that.
crap.
Yeah, it was mammoths with one eye.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a Cyclops.
Cyclops. Yeah.
Yeah.
You do get
So-
and also, how the hell did the Neolithic people build? You know, they moved massive stones. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mammoths.
Mammoths.
Yeah. That's how you do it.
I mean, they're still
Man.
recording like Auroch, which are the massive cattle-like creature. You know, there's one was spotted in the forest in
It all
Germany in like
started with the
1500
orcs.
AD or something like that. So, you know, a lot of our estimates of when these things died out, I think, is really skewed sometimes.
Sure. And I mean, isn't all modern cattle basically descended from one small group of aurochs?
Yeah, probably.
And they do some.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
But it gets ridiculous when they're talking about Stonehenge stones and they show people pulling the rock on a sled.
Yeah.
And you're like, why don't they use a cow?
Yeah. Yeah. They had beasts of burden.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. But
Well, how do the Grail legends get mixed in with the Arthurian stuff? Like,
okay, so there's 2 things to talk about. One of them is the first native Grail story. It's called
Parsifal.
Isant Grail, or the Welsh Holy Grail, it's known as. And it's a very early text, and it's very much on the same line as the romantic texts. Knights going out, having very strange experiences, a lot of cosmic symbolism in there. I was mentioned to Trevor about also the Grail. One description in the Welsh Holy Grail, the Grail sounds like a UFO. It's like a little ball of light that flies into the chamber they're sitting in, and it like flies around the chamber and then flies out again. It's
wow.
it's really odd. But
Yeah, like it's a ball lightning or something. Or
yeah.
an orb. Yeah.
My wife saw ball lightning when she was
Really?
a teenager. Yeah, she had no idea what it was at the time.
Man, that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
really rare.
Yeah, she
I think somebody was supposed to have just recently gotten some video of one.
Yeah,
I saw a
I've seen
post
some
of
like
that.
AI stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I
don't know.
can't tell. Is
Yeah.
it real or not? Yeah.
God damn it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very annoying.
By the time we get good enough video footage, now there's AI, and we can't tell even if
Yeah,
the
you
good
can't.
video
That's
footage is
right.
real.
Freaking hell.
That's right. Used to be the
Universe is keeping us from discovering Bigfoot on purpose. dude.
That's right. Pictures and video used to be the holy grail of
know,
evidence for this kind of stuff, and now it
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
It looks too real.
Yeah.
It's got to be AI.
Yep.
So the other thing suggested in texts like the Mabinogion as well is a pre-Roman and Celtic idea of the cauldron that can raise people from the dead. So there could be a very non-Christian route to the Grail, essentially. So really
Tell us
fascinating.
about that. Where does the story come? Like, tell us the story.
So the Cauldron of Dawn. So you get one of the in the British pantheon. There's a goddess called Dawn. She's got another name as well that escapes me at the minute. It's the red wine. Dawn. So there's a really interesting story. We'll talk about it in terms of Taliesin because Taliesin's fascinating. Taliesin is a 6th century poet from the time of Arthur. He's considered historical, and we even have several poems that are at least attributed to him. Even if they aren't necessarily written by him, they're attributed to him. And there's a story about Taliesin's creation rather than birth. He was born to Dawn, or he was rescued by Dawn. I can't remember which one it is. And the baby was called Elfin, right? And Dawn was brewing up a cauldron of Arwen, and Arwen is really fascinating. Arwen in Welsh poetry is the creative force. So you'll see some people describe it as inspiration, but I don't think inspiration is a full translation for what they're talking about. Yes, it includes creativity, but when they say the creative force, I think it's something much more powerful and important than just poetic inspiration. I think it has a lot more of a deeper significance than that. Anyway, Elfin, just like Obelix. Did you know Asterix and Obelix? Did you read those cartoons when you were a kid? They're French cartoons. They're quite popular here. But Elfin falls into the cauldron of Arwen, right? The Cauldron of Dawn as well. We can also associate with a constellation, and the Milky Way is the Arwen flowing out of the Cauldron of Dawn, right? So anyway, so Elfin falls in, and he comes out again, and Dawn's like, "Oh shit! He's drank all the potion. He's going to be really powerful and really annoying, right?" And the baby child that's been considerably changed by this experience sort of realizes and goes, "Right, I'm off," right? And he charges off at full speed. And the story goes through several different, it depends on which version of the story, but he basically turns into a hare and then turns into an otter and then turns into a salmon, which, in his way to try and escape. And then eventually he gets caught up in a salmon net and he's a human again. But he's got all of his knowledge shining out of his face, basically. It's just so obvious that this guy is, fully one with everything. And they call him Taliesin, which means shining brow, which is very interesting if you're thinking about Western traditions of a third eye or something like that. Taliesin's literally described as shining brow. And then from then on, he then becomes, he's listed as Ben Baird, which means head chief bard of Arthur. But that, in a way, that gives you a little brief idea of what the Grail could be, in as much as this pre-Christian idea of a cauldron of creative energy.
How do you spell the word dawn?
Oh, Dawn, D-O-N, literally.
D-O-N.
Yeah.
What is the meaning of it?
So it's just her name. I mean, I haven't looked. I mean,
just a name. Doesn't have a meaning.
Well,
okay.
The thing is, there probably is a meaning to it. But I don't know off
First,
the
I
top
thought
of my
he was
head.
Dawn.
I thought he was talking about the sunrise. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
what I was
Dawn.
thinking
Yeah,
too.
okay. No,
That's
no,
rebirth,
it's
right? Like the
Dawn.
rebirth.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find out what her actual event Dawn. God,
But it's all good. Keep going. This is great.
No,
So
no,
this
yeah.
is just-
So yeah, the Arwen is really important in terms of Welsh poetry, but it's really interesting that you get these really pre-Christian ideas start to get incorporated in Welsh Bardic poetry of the medieval era, which is very thoroughly Christian. You have bards doing things where they'll talk about almost like necromancy. They'll talk about raising the spirits of dead bards to inhabit them so they can then perform. Like Taliesin is one in particular who gets picked out. I'm going to let Taliesin possess me and then perform a poem through me. Right.
Channeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they would say this in Christian courts in medieval Europe. I mean, and get away with it. Like it was part of their... it's amazing. There's also the idea of the grave. Taliesin's grave comes up, and essentially what the practice seems to be with bards is that they would, someone would reach the end of their training. They would have learned, all their master's work, so they should be able to reel it off without reading it. Wales is very much an oral tradition in their country, which is possibly why we don't have a lot of written down stuff until later on, is because of the reliance on oral tradition. So you get your new bard, and you take him off, and you get him hopped up on whatever you've got, right? Magic mushrooms, booze, probably something, maybe even like something we think of poisonous today, but which can, create dreamlike effects and things like that. And then what seems to be, and this is an interpretation, but what seems to be done is they take them to something like so we get these like kist burials, which is sort of like a dolmen that's sunk into the ground. So you've got like a coffin in the ground and then a massive capstone over the top. And what it seems like they did was they then took these bards, these initiates, and they put them in and put the capstone on. And they'd let them have their death. And then take the capstone off, which is something we see again and again and again in various cultures, of giving someone a symbolic death and then raising them again. And I'm sure it's something that people have suggested for like Egyptian boxes and things like that as well, as to produce, mind-changing and life-changing effects, especially if you think you're going to die in there. But once you die, you don't die ever again because you're already dead. This is a really important part of a lot of people's mythology. So once you've died once, you don't die again. And that seems to be in this. We find it, in the Middle East, in Egypt, in Greece, maybe, and then we find it in medieval Western Britain. It suddenly just pops up. Like, where does this come from? Like, it's so weird. It's such the Brythonic tradition, Wales and Cornwall and Scotland. It's so complex and so vast, and it stretches back into prehistory. And basically, all most people know about it is Arthur. Yeah, it's just full of these, all these interconnected threads, which just take us over all of the snaky topics which you guys discuss all the time. I sent you a flood myth as well recently, Russ. It's recorded in the Triads. So the Welsh flood myth is about a great beast called a Fanc, which seems to be like some
that's right. Yeah,
cat which emerges from a lake, and the lake floods the world. And then a character called Navid Nevion builds a boat for Doivan and Doivach, which is a male and female character, which are then carried away on the boat, and then they get carried to Britain. So yeah, there's a flood myth which is recorded from Christian Wales, but it isn't the Christian flood myth.
Yes, that's right. And when I remember you sent me this to me, and I looked at it, and it's very similar to a Native American one. They have one where basically a kind of cosmic serpent either goes into or comes out of a spirit lake and causes it to flood the world. And it's actually fleeing from something else. It's a really strange story.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. We get really similar labyrinths, which are similar to Hopi ones in Britain as well.
Ah. Shit.
I mean, we could go into King Arthur in America, but it's that's
Did
a
he
whole
come over
other
here?
thing.
Did he also conquer?
So it's not like it's not one of my
They need
favorite
copper.
aspects, but one thing that John Dee had particularly brought into the forefront was a story about Prince Maddock, who sailed from Britain in the 6th century. Well, according to Dee's story, it's in the 10th century, and Prince Maddock discovered America. But you do also find a Maddock recording as a son of Uther.
Oh.
So therefore, a brother or half-brother of Arthur.
Man.
So it's interesting, and there's lots of stories. You know, it's all wrapped up with all the sort of Ben Franklin myths as well about trying to discover a Bible in the native peoples in the West. What are they called? Lewis and Clark.
Yeah.
All the research they had was from other people who'd been west, and they'd gone west because they were looking for Welsh-speaking Native Americans. And that's where Lewis and Clark got most of their information from.
Yes, I have to say with the Lewis, I have not gone down that rabbit hole, but I know that there's really strange stuff with the Lewis.
Yeah, there's loads of strange stuff with Lewis
Yeah,
and Clark, isn't there?
yeah. I haven't gone down it, but I know that there's lots of strange shit.
Yeah,
Why did the Spanish think, when Cortez got there, or not the Spanish, but the natives think when Cortez showed up, they're like, "Oh yeah, you're the guy who,
Yeah,
Yeah.
Quetzalcoatl or
Yeah,
whatever it
yeah,
was.
you're
like,
the
you're
return.
You're the return."
yeah. And then there's the all the expeditions looking for a fountain of youth in Florida. I mean, there's just, and if fountain of youth is Grail-y.
Grail, absolutely.
Grail-esque.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's fascinating.
they think they found Avalon.
I
This
mean,
must be where he is.
lucky in Florida if it doesn't sink again. I mean,
So what are so we've got the source possibly of the Grail, which is this cauldron thing of rebirth. What about the sword in the lake?
oh, sword in the lake. I don't know, but Excalibur is very old and very Welsh. All of Arthur's spear, dagger, shield. Sword, spear, shield, dagger, and horse are all named in pretty old Welsh literature. Excalibur is called Caliburn by Geoffrey of Monmouth, and in Welsh it's something like Caladfulch or something like that. My preferred translation is something like hard cleft, and again, talking about swords again, it seems to be implying that it would cleft holes in other people's swords. That seems to be the thing. A greater deal is actually made of Arthur's spear, and really, if he's fighting on a horse, he probably would have been fighting with a spear a bit more. How that then, I don't know how the Lady of the Lake comes about, but things like water spirits and stuff like that are very important in Brythonic tradition, and religious sites here are pretty much always accompanied by springs, wells, or some other fresh water source, essentially.
But there's also the thing with the sword and the stone, which is not. It's like a different sword.
Oh,
Right. This is not Excalibur.
well,
but
I mean, if you look at the earliest references, those things, that maybe the difference isn't so cut and dry between the two, but people do like to separate out Excalibur and the sword and the stone.
because
You
they
are
might
right
be the same.
that they do that. But the Sword of the Stone doesn't feature in Geoffrey. That comes later. So there is another thing about the Lady in the Lake. Sorry, Kyle. And that is
Keep
the
going.
fact that in Britain, and actually in a lot of places in Europe, but in Britain we see this loads, that from the Bronze Age onwards, people would cast weapons into marshes, bogs, lakes, as a some sort of
An
offering.
offering.
Yeah, and they did that for a long time in Britain. It happened for a long time. So maybe not getting a sword back, but throwing a sword to the lake. That could be talking about a very old tradition, which has then been.
So then the Lady
of
of the Lake would be basically giving Arthur a very old relic, a very ancient piece of technology that was better than everything at the time.
But they might have also been still doing that practice of casting swords in the 6th century. There's definitely been even later medieval swords found in deposits, like in marshlands and things like that in other parts of Britain. So
I know I always get really mad when I see those stories of like kid in river pulls out ancient bronze sword like perfectly preserved. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, I know, right? I know. And the sword in the stone. So bronze swords were cast. They weren't hammered. So they would literally create a wooden or soft stone mold and then pour the metal in. And then, so one suggestion, one theory, one hypothesis is that the sword in the stone story is recording the idea about when people who could metalwork were thought of as powerful and important people.
Right.
And they are literally drawing the sword from the stone. You know, drawing the metal out of the ore, for starters, and then casting a sword in the stone.
Yeah, I had, I think way earlier in the podcast, I talked about this concept because some of Randall's interpretation of that the Grail may be a crater.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's like it's symbolizing a rebirth because possibly a chunk of a comet that comes down causes massive devastation. Like the whole
turns the land into
a wasteland, but also it contains within it the seeds of rebirth.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, there's also this interesting thing about, so you have Merlin and the magic, and then you have the sword in the lake, and if the lake is a cauldron.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So the lake itself is a crater full of water. So down in the lake is a stone containing space steel. And Merlin knows, like, okay, here's the lake. I know because of the shape of this lake that it's cosmic. If we can find a stone in here, I know how to get metal out of this that will make a sword that will defeat any other.
It's divine.
And then they draw the sword from the stone, which is the whole, like, you're smelting the steel out of the... Anyway, that's a complicated idea, but like these metaphors being mixed is really interesting.
But then also that lake, the crater is the Grail, right? Is that what you were saying in the beginning?
Yeah.
A lot of craters now are filled with water, aren't they? So
yeah.
I mean, what I think is interesting so there's a lot of, shall we say, mainstream support for this idea of Bronze Age sword casting possibly being the origin of this Sword of the Stone story. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is the idea that these medieval historians could not accurately record something that happened 600 years before them, but they could accurately record something that happened 2,000 years before them. Right?
Yeah.
That's a great point.
And I think there's a bit of dissonance. And as I say, I don't mind them being able to do both. But, oh no, they didn't know anything about early medieval Britain. But they have recorded genuine tradition from the Bronze Age. Like, what?
Yeah.
What? There's a...
And would they...
Go on.
I mean, maybe this is... I don't know. But would they not be a little bit more upfront about, or just detailed about the smelting process or the process of making swords? Why would they make it so poetic?
I mean, it could have been like that when they got their hands of it. But also, if there was some secret to metallurgy, if this was something that was passed down father to son and not something that was generally known about,
But like every able-bodied male needed one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like a well-kept secret that nobody could figure out. Like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
No, the actual art of making it was a well kept secret. But yes, they made a bunch. Right? I think if that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm trying to say that like a lot of people had to make swords for like everybody to have one.
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
So
I
it
mean, I
can't
think
be,
the
how
only
well of a secret
I
can it
just
be?
have Hattori Hanzo, one guy.
the only thing
Maybe
I can draw like a similarity to, and they don't need as many of them, is like when they used to cast bells for churches. This would be something that would be passed down father to son, and if a son died and hadn't passed it on, then you'd have to go looking somewhere else to find someone who could cast bells because
make a bell,
it was
yeah.
such a complicated and it was a secret process, you know.
Okay.
So, but you don't need as
All
many
right.
church bells as you need swords. I'll give you that. You know,
Right.
And that's also why, I mean, many of the smelting techniques are preserved today, but there's plenty that we don't know. There's
Yeah.
metals that are named that no one knows
yeah, absolutely.
what they were made of. The old Damascus steel, we know it existed. We don't know how they made it, but we know it was coveted by people during that period because it was so strong.
Yeah,
you know.
they'd say about the Isle of Avalon that it was a place known for casting really good weapons, which is kind of interesting because you get some really good iron in Britain as well, really good quality iron, and coal as well. The Romans didn't use coal until they came to Britain.
So I guess what I'm asking is more particularly about this point about the drawing the sword from the stone.
Yeah.
Are there any of these older sources that talk about the casting of weapons?
Oh no!
Like,
no,
does
no,
anybody talk about it clearly or plainly?
no, no.
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 Okay, so it was. I mean, that supports the idea that it was a well kept secret if it's not talked about by anybody.
Yeah, and also it's kind of like when you go back to a certain time, people are only really interested in recording the deeds of the bigwigs. Then,
Yeah,
gotcha. Unless you have just like one really good historian, or you have that like paperwork, like that we have from say Babylon and stuff. We've also got we've got all these letters between merchants and things like that. That's great.
Yeah.
That
Your copper sucks.
yeah, your copper sucks exactly. Yeah. But we don't really have that for the other period, for a lot of periods in a lot of places. We only have this king did that and this king did that, or this bishop did that, or we don't have the day-to-day activities as such.
So, what do you think the significance of the focus on the sword in the sort of in this
So there's
part of the tale is? Why would somebody even bring this up?
Well, I mean, if you're Sigmund Freud, you'd say it was because it was a cigar, and they like smoking cigars.
I love swords too. I mean, like a legendary, powerful sword is always a
Yes,
great
like,
topic. It's like, yes, given to
Can
me
I
by
tell
the
you about
gods.
another sword? Can we move away from Excalibur?
Yeah,
Sure.
So in the British versions of Caesar's invasion, he's wielding a sword that they call Yellow Death, or Mors Crocea, right? And the historian, I think it's Geoffrey, says they called it that because whoever it touched, it killed. Because the Yellow Death was a name they used for plagues and things like that. Caesar's fighting, and then suddenly his like retinue gets sort of separated from him, and Caesar comes into single combat with a British prince called Nennius, and Caesar's sword gets stuck in Nennius's shield, right? But only after Nennius has received a pretty horrible blow to the head as well. But then Nennius takes Caesar's sword out of his shield and then kills off a load of Caesar's retinue. Doesn't manage to get to Caesar, but he's got his sword, right? And this sword then gets secreted away, and then there's a few records throughout history of it being brought out at certain events where they'd be like, oh yeah, and then we got this sword out because we were having a big feast, and it was like, yeah, let's celebrate the fact that we've got Caesar's sword. But it's interesting, this word crocea, they call it Mors Crocea. Crocea doesn't really mean yellow, it means of the crocus, so it means saffron coloured, which is like a reddy gold color. So in my opinion, I think Mors Crocea was a bronze sword,
Yeah.
not an iron sword. Which is interesting because even there's records of this, I think, in Herodotus, actually. So it could be a load of shite. But the suggestion is that a lot of important people would continue using bronze swords for quite a long time because you're less likely to get an infection from a sword from a wound from a bronze sword. Iron
Tetanus?
sword, you'd get a horrible infection in your wound, but for some reason with the bronze ones you wouldn't. So I like the idea that Caesar had a bronze sword. So this is kind of interesting when you then come into
Well, copper is copper is an antifungal.
yeah.
Like a
Excellent antifungal.
So you then come forward several thousand years, and you come to the city of London, which is Britain's most powerful and I don't know how to put it. It's the banking establishment. It's the merchant establishment.
It's
of
the little
Britain.
square mile.
Yep. Inside the
That's what you're talking
Roman
about, the city of
walls
London.
of London.
antibacterial and antifungal. So
Oh, fantastic! Yeah.
yeah,
So double
that's-
whammy.
That's interesting. Wow.
The city of London. If you want to find stuff from the matter of Britain, if you go into the city of London, that's where you'll find it. Loads of interesting things. The giants, Gog and Magog, represented as two great statues in the Guildhall. The other thing is, what I'm getting at is the badge of the City of London. It's like a shield with classic St. George's Cross in it. In the top left-hand corner, there's a red sword. And I think this is representing Caesar's sword.
Do you think it's Caesar's sword?
Yeah.
Wow.
But then not that anyone will ever talk about it. Or
Right. Yeah. That's all that stuff is sub rosa.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It is interesting. And say this stuff just bubbles under the surface. It's everywhere, really. You just don't.
Oh.
You just kind of don't know it.
We may lose power.
Just got to. Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, you got some roll.
We have a thunderstorm here, and our lights are flickering.
Oh.
So.
Well, I'll know what happens.
just in case we lose it. It's been a great show.
Yeah. It's been fantastic.
I mean, should we wrap up on something or?
We can wrap up. I had other questions about like the Stone of Tara and this other stuff. Like, do they connect? Is this part of all this stuff? But yeah, I don't know.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
feel
think
like
we
probably
can.
should wrap up.
It. I mean, just as a brief one, it's really interesting stuff like that to lump in as the mythos of Britain and Ireland, right? Which is generally completely dismissed as fiction straight out of hand by most academics today. And I think it's worth a second look. I think it's worth a deeper investigation, especially with the technology which is now available to us today. Not just the technology of being able to test the stone or whatever, but also, having all these resources right here in front of us on a computer screen.
Yeah.
Historians in the past couldn't just double check that quickly and
Yeah,
look,
go
go
to the
back. We
archives.
can do that sort of thing. We can check it against the geography. We can check it against place names. We can, the internet is an amazing tool like that. And like my own personal, I mean, we've barely touched on my own Arthurian investigations, but I couldn't have been able to do what I feel like I've done, if what I've done is worthwhile, without the internet, essentially.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would have discovered the things I feel like I've discovered without having those tools available to me. And that's what we have now, which not even people 50 years ago had, or even 20 years ago had.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I can hear the storm coming. So we should wrap it up. So
Yeah.
okay, we're gonna have part 2.
Nice.
Clearly, because
Got
we didn't even get into your Arthurian
Yeah, I know. I just
investigation.
found out you have your own Arthurian legend. I want to hear it.
Thank you so much, man. It's been great.
That's all right. My pleasure.
You've laid the groundwork to do the actual show.
Hopefully I haven't just confused the shit out of everyone. That's what I feel
Dude,
like.
I feel educated on the topic.
Definitely,
quite a
I
bit,
feel
man.
much more enlightened.
I don't
Very
like
cool.
going in and saying, like, I think Arthur is this guy, and I think it because of this, this, and this, and this. Because, one, that's not my I actually ascribe to other people's theories. But the other thing is that that's just not a good way to go about it. I want you to I'd rather you came out of it knowing a bit more about the sources, knowing a bit more about the context,
Yeah.
knowing a bit more about the archaeology, than just going, "Hey, I think Arthur's this guy," because that would just you wouldn't know what to do with that. Like, you know,
That's cool.
yeah,
I appreciate the context.
Yes.
Yeah.
The context and the sources were great.
cool,
All right.
nice. And we'll look at some tin mining as well at some point.
Yeah, we'll look at tin
Cool.
mining as well.
Oh yeah,
And the patrons will get a little.
Yeah, the patrons have a pre-show
Yeah.
discussion, which I'll
Pre-show.
post, which will get some little teasers on the Bronze Age stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
nice.
Cool, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Cheers. Good harvest.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work. We appreciate all of you guys listening and supporting the show. Thank you so much. Yeah. We're out of here before we lose power.